Yeah, just on this, a South Australian business leader has scuttled Chris Bowen's estimates about the costs of nuclear as being grossly inflated. The state's Chamber of Minerals and Energy Chief Executive, Rebecca Knol, says it's the rising cost of stabilising a renewables-dominated electricity grid that is the problem, and nuclear is the likely answer. I asked her to explain the problem.
Yeah, of course. So South Australia turned off their baseload power about 6 years ago in 2016, and as most people would remember, we then had a blackout straight after that. What's happened is that the direction charges, so these are the frequency controlled direction charges, infrastructure costs that are imposed on commercial and industrial customers, have increased 224% in the last 5 years. Direction charges used to reasonably be about $6 million per quarter. That's what it was in Q4 2019. Q4 2022, it had escalated to $20 million. And of course, these costs are borne by commercial and industrial players, but they're passed on to customers. And so we're really facing a cost of business crisis here in South Australia on top of a cost of living crisis, with many businesses now looking to offshore production and then bring the finished product back to Australia, because the cost of electricity is now accounting for somewhere between 20 and 30% of their electricity bills.
See, these are the hidden costs of the renewable energy transition that nobody talks about. Apart from all the investment in infrastructure, in transmission, in wind farms and solar farms, you've got all these additional costs for firming and to stabilise the system. And South Australia's gone far ahead of the rest of the country. The rest of the country is heading down the same track, though, which is why you point out the obvious solution is to go to nuclear energy, because it's reliable, dispatchable, it's there all the time, and you don't have all those additional costs.
Yeah, so our position is that all proven low-emission technologies should be on the table, and nuclear is obviously one of those. South Australia is a uranium jurisdiction. We export about 25% of the world's uranium, so we are helping to decarbonise other parts of the planet. But of course, with the federal prohibition in place here in Australia, we can't maximise that benefit. And as you say, these costs, these direction charges, market intervention costs, as we tend to call them, are an unintended consequence of pursuing a 100% renewable ambition. We would also argue that it seems nonsense to ask one technology, i.e. renewables, just one technology to get us to a decarbonised future. Our position is we need everything on the table. We need every horse in the race.
Yeah, there's no doubt that we need a mixture. There's going to be gas firming for a long while. Of course, hydro will be around and renewables will be around. But it seems absurd that when Australia is one of the largest exporters of uranium, other countries are using that to provide dispatchable, affordable energy. Why would we deny ourselves that opportunity? In fact, the federal government today is saying it's unaffordable. So I don't know what the rest of the world's doing with it then.
Yeah, it's curious what's been talked about today by Minister Bowen. The numbers are fanciful, and there is plenty of dialogue circulating today on that. The cost that's been put out today by Minister Bowen appears to be about 18 times the cost and almost double what is actually required. So no one's been advocating for a 100% move to nuclear. What everybody has been advocating for on this side is to say that we need it as part of the mix. So here in South Australia, that might only be 300 megawatts, would be sufficient to stabilise our grid and reduce these direction and market intervention costs.
The other factor here is if you have a high capital cost initially to invest in nuclear, and as you say, you don't need as much as what's been suggested, the point is that nuclear investment, that capital cost lasts 80 years or more, at least 75 years, close to 100 years, whereas the renewable capital investment has to be replaced every 15 to 20 years.
Yes, correct. And it's curious also that we haven't talked about the cost of hydrogen when we're exploring that technology. Everybody's been running down that path. Similarly with renewable energy, nobody talked about the cost of dispatching that power or the transmission costs. It's only recently that those things have started to be talked about, and yet with nuclear we seem to want to get bogged down in a conversation about cost before we actually even explore whether we can do it. It's also interesting that the Minister has had his department to explore the costs of nuclear when there is a federal prohibition in place. It would be best probably left to people that are building SMRs or other nuclear reactors to determine costs. But as I say, we're estimating those costs are about 18 times what is reliably talked about.
Rebecca, thanks so much for injecting some facts into the debate.
My pleasure. Thank you, Chris.